Welcome to this RYI event. We're very lucky to have John Makransky with us, introducing us to this approach to such approach to, it's almost like an approach to taking refuge in a genuine way.
Approach to taking refuge in a genuine way.
Yeah.
Sounds nice to me. I'm learning that, yeah.
And actually making Buddha nature much more, I would say, much more accessible. That's good. Much more accessible.
Or more real to us.
Yeah, real.
Real to us.
Yeah, to us.
Yeah.
It really reminds me of your work on embodied Buddhahood.
Oh, Buddhahood Embodied.
Embodied.
That was my first book, yeah.
Yeah, somehow I see a real sense of continuity in there.
Yeah, that's right.
Digging this material to the point where it becomes even more natural somehow.
Yeah, with the support of my teachers.
With this,
yeah, not me. Yeah, but
right.
thank you. Yeah.
So it's quite wonderful. We're really lucky to be a recipient of this teaching. So please welcome John Makransky.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. So again, tomorrow's might be my last presentation, tomorrow evening, 5 o'clock. Tomorrow I'll be at lunch again at the Upala at 1 p.m. for those who wish to join me if you want to have conversation about any of these things. And also a reminder, the meditations I'm leading are on the handout that's on the Google link. So anyone who's really taking real interest in these meditations and the understandings within them, then really you need to look at that handout. It will remind you. It will give you also the wording of the meditations, which I try to make pretty precise, and it will help you reconnect with it all and kind of deepen our understanding together. So I'll begin with Refuge Bodhicitta prayer. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and supreme spiritual community, I go for refuge until full enlightenment. By the power of bodhicitta and all six perfections, may I realize Buddhahood for the sake of all mother, father beings. All beings who are just like my mother and father. So I'm going to quote again from a teacher from the Dzogchen tradition, which is what I'm sharing from, mainly from Nyingma Dzogchen and Kagyu Mahamudra kind of background of teaching. So Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche said, the teachings of Dzogchen do not focus mainly on trying to generate positive qualities. The advice is to go directly to the source, luminous openness itself, Buddha nature, and discover that the qualities are already there. If you do that, then you do not have to work hard to feel love, for example. Love is abundant in the open space of your being. Can I repeat that? And that really introduces the meditation I'll lead tonight. So Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche said, the teachings of Dzogchen do not focus mainly on trying to generate positive qualities. The advice is to go directly to the source, luminous openness itself, Buddha nature, and discover that the qualities are already there. If you do that, then you do not have to work hard to feel love, for example. Love is abundant in the open space of your being right now. So the field of care practice, it's a kind of field of refuge practice that we've been doing in prior sessions, provides a way actually to tap directly into positive qualities of our Buddha nature, nature of mind, luminous openness, ground of our experience. And then to let those positive qualities help the mind to trust their source enough to begin to settle into their source, luminous openness itself, the pervasive space and lucidity of our being, our Buddha nature. And this becomes the basis now in the session that we're engaging right now. That becomes the basis to include many other beings in the pervasive power of love, compassion, and wisdom that is always available in the open space of our being, as Tenzin Wangyal said. So that's the arc of the practices that I've been sharing. Field of care into deep letting be. So becoming a loving, healing environment with the help of a field of care. Welcoming all of our feelings and reactions into that deeply healing environment, which is actually provided by our Buddha nature through the field of care and a framework. And then noticing how the mind perhaps can actually, with the help of these positive qualities that it's experiencing, the healing environment that it's becoming, trust enough to let go of itself and relax into the ground of these positive qualities, the ground of experience, the lucid openness in the nature of mind or Buddha nature, or just to begin to do that, just to begin to settle, relax, rest into the ground of our experience. So that's from field of care into the letting be, which is the last step of the field of care meditation and the full meditation we did last evening. And now from there, in this session, well, now we've accessed our depth, our depth with these loving qualities that are coming from our depth by beginning to relax into or lean into the ground of those qualities, the depth of our being, our Buddha nature. Now from there, then we can begin to sense others in their depth, not just the superficial reactive, endless reactive minds. From our depth, sensing others more in their depth, below the radar, as it were, of our endless reactivity, our endless reaction to superficial impressions and labels of each other, through which we never actually know each other, which is the samsaric world we've all been inhabiting together. Now, maybe a position to draw from our depth and sense and commune with others in their depth, below the crazy reactive mind that our minds have been so thoroughly identified with together, beginninglessly. Is that sort of clear? So the field of care meditation is number 2 in the handout that you all should have now. And the meditation we'll do in this session is number 6 in that handout, called inclusive mode, extending love to many others. And we start the meditation of extending love with the field of care meditation as a platform to reconnect with that platform of unconditional care, to help us again become that deeply kind of naturally loving, healing environment for all, like all of our feelings, all of our reactions, from which to become a healing environment for others, to include others. So there are three basic skills that we cultivate within the field of care meditation practice that we're going to draw on this evening to empower this inclusive mode meditation. Is that okay? Do we all have our seatbelts fastened? Three skills that we're cultivating in the field of care meditation. The first skill is in this field of care practice, we let the loving qualities evoked by the field of care make us into a healing environment for all parts of ourselves. And that becomes the basis in the inclusive mode to become a loving, healing environment for others. Without the former, I don't think we can become the latter. If we're not a healing environment for all parts of ourselves, we'll endlessly react to others. We can't be a healing environment for them because they'll trigger our reactions. And now we're reacting to them, at them, because we don't know how to be a healing environment for the reactions in us that they trigger. But if we are a deeply healing environment for our own reactions, we are automatically already starting to become a healing environment for the others as well, even the ones who trigger our reactions. Is that clear? This is the deep groundedness, I think, of teachers I've known. I mean, like realized teachers. Another phrasing of this is that the power of warmth and compassion that can spaciously hold all parts of ourself can also hold all others as if they were parts of our greater self. I'll repeat that. This is the first skill we're learning with the field of care meditation as a foundation for now the inclusive mode of meditation, extending love to others. The power of warmth and compassion that can spaciously hold all parts of ourself can also hold all others as if they were parts of our greater self. And this actually comes up in the Bodhicharvatara that I think many of you are studying. All beings as if they're limbs of the world, the limbs of our greater self or greater being. In this way, now comes the second skill we cultivate in the field of care meditation. In that way, in the field of care meditation, we're drawing on qualities from the depth of our being, our Buddha nature. And in the last step of that meditation, you can look at it on the handout, the instruction becomes to let this loving, healing environment that you're becoming for all parts of yourself, let that help your mind to trust enough to just release all of its frameworks of mind. Just release its frameworks of grasping to this or that, or this sense of self or that. Just release goals, agendas, and deeply let be right into the ground of your experience, which is the source of these positive qualities. That's the last step of the field of care meditation. That's also the letting be of mind that we did last night. Is that clear? So in that last step of the field of care meditation, or the letting be meditation, we start to settle into the depth of our being. Buddha nature, it's the pervasive openness, clarity, and vast capacity in the depth of our mind, the nature of our mind. Mind as such, Senni, our Buddha nature. And then in the inclusive mode, from that depth of being, as I said, we can sense others in the depth of their being. We can begin to sense them in their Buddha nature, more from the ground, and uphold them in the depth of their being, in their Buddha nature, even if they don't realize that's happening, just as we never realized that was happening by all those who awakened before us and were holding us in that way. we never realized that was happening until somehow in some part of this life we began to be introduced to it. So also we're learning to come from our depth to sense and uphold others in their depth, even if they don't know that's happening. Who cares? It's a learning for us, just like our teachers have done for us, even before speaking to us. They were holding us. And that was the ground from which they began speaking. Whenever they speak, if it's realized teachers. That's the second skill, accessing qualities of our depth. The third skill that we learn in the field of care meditation that we then carry into the inclusive, extending love meditation we'll do this evening. This third skill is, in this process, as we've learned, the process makes us newly aware of many painful reactive parts of ourselves, layers of suffering within us, much of which has been unconscious, that have impeded much fuller access to our depth and its qualities. The endless inner patterns of endless reactivity and fear and anxiety and struggle. We become much more conscious of that as the field of care helps us become a healing environment for it all that permits it to become more conscious to us. So this becoming newly conscious of layers of suffering in ourselves that we were not so conscious of, with the help of this field of care meditation, that awareness of suffering is the basis in this inclusive, extending love mode of practice I'll introduce now, the basis to hold others in compassion, aware of many similar inner layers of suffering in them all that they are not fully conscious of, but they're carrying with them like a shadow, as we ourselves have carried our layers of suffering like a shadow haunting us, because we didn't know how to be a healing environment for them, for all these layers. In a way, this is like sensing how lost we have all been together here in samsara from our Buddha nature, how lost we have all been. Sensing that, sensing the suffering of that lostness, a shared lostness, with compassion for all in that shared lostness, because we're starting to access qualities of our Buddha nature, positive qualities, and beginning even to lean into that nature. And that begins to open a perspective that shows us the lostness, how lost we have been from it. And this is part of the reason why, although we're starting to wake up, one of the first insights is how lost I've been, how lost we've all been together here, caught up, suffering so much, even before we do anything to each other. And that's compassion. And that's part of the reason why in the field of care meditation, when I asked, well, what qualities did you experience when you were settling into this meditation, experiencing yourself held in love and compassion and warmth and care, and people say, oh, felt wonderful, ease of being and love and warmth and care and acceptance, and I felt openness and transparency, and became a little non-dual, and non-self started to emerge for me. And someone else would say, deep grief, deep grief. And sometimes that deep grief is really a positive attitude, because it may be this grief, how lost we've been. All of us here together, lost from the power of these positive qualities, which are actually so accessible and present to us if we learn how to become more open to them. Then deep grief can come. I think Pema Chodron called that like our original grief, our primordial grief, grieving over what beings are going through, oneself being one of those beings, grieving over what we've been going through together. And that's compassion. No, it can't be this way. We must awaken. Actually, we must all awaken, starting with my parents, starting with my mother and father, all the suffering they went through, the Depression, the Second World War, killing and almost being killed, worrying endlessly, losing everything, struggling to make a living, trying to support their children, starting with my parents. There must be a deep freedom for them. There must be deepest well-being for them. Well, then everyone's like my parents. Everyone. That was actually a description of part of their lives. So we're going to begin the inclusive mode meditation, this extending of love meditation, with a brief field of care practice, which we did prior 2 nights. It's in your handout as meditation number 2. Please review it when you can. And then we're going to let the healing environment from that practice of field of care, the environment of deep warmth and acceptance for all parts of ourself, all reactions, all feelings, all senses of self, whatever arises is just welcomed, just noticing it and just letting it include itself in this deeply warm, accepting, loving environment that we're becoming with the help of our field of care, our field of refuge. And then we let this loving, healing environment that embraces all parts of us become a loving environment for others, as if they were parts of our larger self. And we let that help us commune with them. I use the word commune, which means here to sense them beyond all superficial judgments, to sense these other beings beyond all superficial judgments, to resonate with them in the depth of their being, in their deep dignity and capacity, while also sensing them in their hidden layers of suffering and struggle, and wishing them deeply well, deeply free. So do this starting with one person or being that you just naturally like to include in this way. No struggle. Someone who comes to mind that, oh, this loving, healing environment, this would be so wonderful if this person also could be here in this, experience this. It might be your child, your spouse, your parent, your friend, whoever it is for you, your pet. Starting with one person and then gradually including others in larger circles and eventually all beings. Now, here's one last important part of all this, critically important for learning this meditation. Absolutely critical. Otherwise, we will all fall down. Okay? So everybody's listening now? If part of you has trouble with this, trouble including others, some reaction comes up, no, not him. Or some part of you comes up that draws your attention away. They're like, uh, thoughts come up in your mind. I really need to plan what I'm doing tomorrow. It's kind of avoiding or any kind of reaction like that that just draws your attention away from the instruction. Just settle back into your field of care. Okay? Remember that? Something starts to draw your attention away. Just settle back into your field of care, which is still there. That's our first part of the meditation. And reunite with its healing environment. Let it help you, again, become a healing environment and become a healing environment for that part of you that's just come up with acceptance and warmth. When that part of you settles, that reaction or that emotion, you can just return to this inclusive, extending love practice. Is that clear? That's absolutely critical. It seems to be a missing piece for a lot of practitioners. Reactions come up that just take us away. We're off in our reactions. What if you notice the reaction? Remember accessing the qualities that make you a healing environment? Noticing. What if you notice the reaction? Like just basic mindfulness. And then let it be included in this healing environment. Settle back into your field of care if that helps. Just let it be included in this absolute acceptance and warmth and healing, love. And let it find its own place, settle in its own way, in its own time. It will, because you're no longer identified with it. Then return to the extending practice, extending love. Okay? You can spend the whole rest of the meditation that way if you need to. Fine. That's a deep learning about the inner obstacles to extending love. Okay, so we've been sitting for a little while. Maybe good to loosen up in our place. Just can stretch if you'd like to. You can demonstrate for all of us how expert you are at stretching. Okay, shall we go ahead? Inclusive mode, extending love meditation. And just sit in a relaxed, comfortable way. You can cough if you need to. Sneezing is permitted. And now just come down from the thinking mind into the body. Can you try to do that? You just settle down into the body, not located in the head so much anymore. And let the gravity of the body help draw you into it. And take a slow, deep breath, inhaling from the abdomen so it expands. Feel it expand. And then exhale slowly, completely. Rest for a moment before inhaling again. And then just repeat that a few times. Slow inhale. Slow, complete exhale. Abdomen contracting again. Rest a moment before inhaling. Just relax. And then repeat. And now, while still breathing from the abdomen, just let the breath settle into its own natural rhythm. And feel the abdomen expand and contract with each breath. Just feel it. And let that feeling of the body moving with the breath just draw you into that feeling more and more. breath by breath. While you're doing that, you can try to recall which kind of field of care is most connecting for you. A caring moment, or benefactor figure, or a spiritual field, like the Buddha or a Yidam or communion of saints, whatever it is for you, or even the natural world itself. So be ready to bring that to mind, that kind of field of care that's most connecting for you, while feeling the body moving with the breath. And now bring to mind your field of care, your caring moment or benefactor or spiritual field. And bring it to mind not just as a memory or some abstract concept, but as present here now to you, really here now. And you are being seen and held in deep care, compassion, acceptance, and warmth, beyond all judgments. You are being held in the depth of your being. In your deep dignity, your deep capacity, with deep care and warmth. And just relax into this experience, just steeping in its loving energies, feeling its tender qualities, and letting them just spaciously infuse your whole being and your whole world. Letting these positive qualities infuse your whole being and your whole world. Just kind of surrendering to these loving qualities and energies while accepting them into your whole body, your whole mind, your whole world. Every part of you loved in its very being. And you might notice various thoughts and feelings and reactions arise. And as you notice them, just let them all be embraced in this naturally in this loving environment of total warmth and acceptance. Every thought, feeling, reaction, letting them all just find their own place in their own time to metabolize themselves in their own way. in this healing environment by letting them all be. Now, think of someone dear to you that you'd naturally like to include in this same loving, healing environment, and let them also be included in this spacious field of loving energies and warmth and acceptance. Or imagine that's happening. And let this help you to commune with them in the depth of their being, to sense them in their deep capacity, dignity, and in their inner layers of stress, struggle, and to wish them deeply well and free. And now let a few more beings come to mind that you'd also like to include, you'd like to include in this same field of loving, healing energy and warmth. And let them also be included along with the first person. And let that help you sense them also in their depth, their hidden layers of stress and struggle, and to wish them deeply well. If you don't feel it much, then just imagine it's happening. Now you can let this practice expand to include larger circles of people and beings that come to mind, including them all in this field of healing energy and warmth and acceptance, letting that help you sense them all in their depth and hidden layers of suffering, while just wishing them deeply well and free. Larger circles of beings who come to mind, just including them all and letting that help you commune with them. And finally, if you wish, you can let the vast underlying capacity of loving energy and warmth and compassion from your basic awareness expand much more fully to include all beings, human, animal, all creatures. Or just imagine that that's happening. All are being included now. And let this help you commune with them all in the depth of their being, their deep nature, their hidden layers of struggle, suffering, while wishing them all deeply well and free, all beings. Or just imagine it's happening. And now in the final step, kind of the letting be of mind, just let this pervasive healing environment of warmth and acceptance just help your mind to just relax deeply. Notice any grasping in the mind to any mental construct, like holding on to any sense of self or framework of thought or agenda. And let that feeling of holding on within just relax deep within. Let that ongoing feeling of holding on within just relax deep within. Releasing all goals and agendas. And let the mind settle back a bit inwardly and just relax into the background of its awareness, which is naturally wide open and luminous, like a sunlit sky. Let the mind just relax back a bit into the background or ground of its awareness, which is naturally wide open and lucid, like a sky. And let this openness and lucidity meditate you, this utter openness. And let any thoughts and reactions that arise just metabolize themselves within this sky-like openness of awareness by just letting them all be. Good. Thank you. So just to crystallize what we were engaging and then open it up for questions. This inclusive mode of meditation, kind of extending love, can help us start to sense others more in the depth of their being from our depth, and to hold them in the same loving environment that holds all parts of ourself. And as the field of care practice makes us more conscious of troubled parts of ourself, as we discussed earlier, kind of hidden layers of suffering in us that need healing, the extension of its love to others helps us compassionately sense others in their hidden layers of suffering and hold them at that level too. So this inclusive meditation includes powers of wisdom, love, and compassion that would ultimately exclude no one, since all are being known and held both in their depth, which is Buddha nature, and in their sufferings beyond superficial labels and judgments. So it cannot exclude anyone, ultimately. There's no basis to exclude anyone within the perspective of this meditation practice. No real basis. Okay, so thank you for exploring all that with me. Then it's open now for any questions and also comments from your experience of the meditation for input. Questions from your experience of the meditation or the talk that I gave, or any comments from your experience or from that talk.
There's a lot of aspects of the meditation that I had a taste of, but I had the feeling if I had a lot more time to investigate, it would become more stable. Trust,
Yeah,
for example.
yeah.
There's the idea that I agree with it. I want to agree with it, and I feel it a little bit, in the sense that with more time that would grow.
Mhm.
So one is addressing that, and then probably a related question of uh, in the format of this, we're stepping through each one in each night. What's your advice about developing a practice and when to move on or
Yeah,
when to
great.
mix and match?
Great question. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, that's really how it works. I think that's true of practices in general in these contemplative traditions, and certainly in Buddhism. Something initially we may be attracted to it. I think really our first point of attraction is, generally speaking, people who have embodied these qualities, the qualities that are cultivated or evoked or brought forward in Dharma practices, people who've practiced enough to have come to embody those qualities attract us, even without saying anything. It's just we can sort of like, when we're receptive, we just read those qualities off of them. And that may not be meeting them in person. It could be hearing about them, or very much it's transmitted through stories in all the various Asian traditions. Stories about figures that are very inspiring, are communicating the qualities that they're embodying. I told one of those stories at lunch. It seemed to have an effect with some of the students and faculty. So yeah, it that's what initially attracts us, I think. But then as we take up some practice, the further attraction is just as we begin to experience some of the qualities or recognize ourselves in the practice. Oh, this is mine. But once we find a way of teaching and learning and a way of approaching practice that really speaks to oneself, and we need to take it up and do it a lot. So that becomes the the kind of, the do 100,000 approach, which initially I found intimidating, and then eventually I realized why. Was just do a lot of it. So I do this a lot, and until it just becomes a touchstone in the morning. So you did the responding to your second question. If someone's practicing in these kinds of practices, I mean, they're all kind of adapted from Tibetan practices of refuge, bodhicitta, ngondro, and patterns from Vajrayana. So it's not different in kind. So anyone who takes up practices like this, you would start with the one that's most connecting for you. For most people, that's field of care. For some people, it's the letting be practice we did last night. For some, they want to get right into the inclusive mode. Somehow that speaks to them, and that helps them open more to the field of care mode. There are other practices I don't have time this week to get into that are in that meditation handout, such as compassionate presence to feelings, which is a big entry point for some other people. Just with great directness becoming a kind of compassionate holding environment for all your feelings. But whatever the kind of meditation practice it is, doing that first thing in the morning and then reconnecting with it repeatedly throughout your day, even if just for a minute at a time. That's what I do. So life is kind of converted into semi-retreat in a way, that you're just doing it again and again and again and again and again throughout your day. It doesn't interfere with your work or anything. You need to take lots of mini breaks from your work anyway, or you go crazy, to sort of clear the mind. So one practitioner I know, and then I learned to do this, is every time you hit save on your computer, but I hit save about every 30 seconds, then you click into practice again for a little bit. And then again, let the qualities from that practice infuse your life. And then that first practice that you're doing that way, first thing in the morning, and then throughout your days, that will naturally begin to draw you toward the next practice for you, which may be getting into letting be, or maybe the inclusive mode, or maybe one of the other practices in that meditation handout. So that's how it kind of gradually unfolds. And that would be in connection with teachers who have practiced a lot in these ways, and community of those who have been practicing for some years and are pretty deep in these practices. So it's the same way it always works with all Buddhist practice traditions. Does that kind of respond okay to your questions? Yeah, it's just like that. Then there's one here.
Thank you so much, John. I'm noticing some changes and progressions over the way you've been delivering this practice over the years. And namely, I recall that you used to call it the extending mode.
Yeah.
And now you're using inclusive.
Yeah.
So sorry for the spoiler alert. Also, the way that your language is kind of evoking a visualization in the practice for me, it presents like two options, at least in trying to bring it into a traditional kind of Tibetan Buddhist context.
Yeah, it's spiritual field.
Yeah, so the spiritual field kind of in front of you that is then you're receiving from.
Yeah.
And then when you say include, I then am bringing those people around me and in front of me and continuing to receive from the spiritual field, less so of like holding above the head, receiving from there and extending as if it was coming from, my sense of self.
All those are, I like that last thing you said. So it's as if this loving, healing environment is naturally including others, not so much you effortlessly trying to autonomously extend love, so like desperately trying to be loving, not so much that. It kind of eases us out of that self-grasping posture. So I'd like how you phrase that. It all sounds good to me. There's no problem with that at all, from my perspective.
Okay.
You know, things sort of take their natural form. Like I think of my spiritual field, I just think of my kind of field of teachers and lineage teachers. Some of them I haven't met, but I can feel their power coming through the teachers I have met and through their writings. And it's like they are here, really. But I also have a yidam in mind that they're kind of all an expression of, but I still bring them to mind too. So it's both them and a yidam. I don't know how traditional that is, but it works for me. The yidam's kind of like the background behind them all. And then the radiance and positive, the awakened powers of the yidam are all coming through them. They are all the yidam, but
Yeah.
I like to see their bodies too, because it's so inspiring to me. Like Dodo Khyentse Rinpoche, just to see him. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From your experience, have you found that it's both ways, or that it's easier to connect to the Yidam through these more accessible beings that you've met in your life?
Well, they're the ones who in any case, they are the ones who connect us to a yidam.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because, in essence, they have unified with the yidam, unified with their Buddha nature, and so they can help us learn to do the same. That seems to be how it is for me. They're not just guys or gals. I mean, you know, kind of in part, they sort of are. Mostly they are actualized Buddha nature. That's mostly what they are. And we can learn to sense that by becoming receptive to it. Because it's already working on our Buddha nature. To begin to recognize it in them is discernment of our own Buddha nature. And theirs is kind of, their actualized Buddha nature is resonating with ours and kind of calling it forth. And that's been happening, as I said, long before we realized that was going on. Long, long, long before. But now, then also in retrospect, sometimes this has come up not only with high lamas or high guru figures, certainly is with them. There's a tremendous power there because they're so fully actualized, or however far it is, it's pretty far. But also key figures in my life who were benefactors. That's why I think it's a very important and powerful option to bring to mind someone that you're genuinely grateful for having been in your life or your world. And I can think of figures like that in my life. And that's very powerful because there have been moments when someone was seeing me or gazing into my eyes. I can remember one time I was a 13-year-old boy, 7th grade. I was a little young Jewish boy. I guess this has come up repeatedly. It must have really affected me. I went to a school that was mostly Christian too. And one boy who was he had been sort of semi a friend of mine, but he sort of surprised me because we were walking into Latin class together and he suddenly threw me a nickel and said, "Here, Jew." As if that's what Jews are about, is they want to hoard nickels. So that was that. I couldn't believe he'd said that. So then as he walked into the class, I did a flying tackle. I ran into the classroom and tackled him right in the middle of class. The Latin teacher was there and started pummeling him. So that was the 13-year-old me. So The Latin teacher was surprised. What's this, Johnny? I was the best student in the class. To brag, I was very good at Latin. I loved it. So that's partly why he was surprised. I wasn't a troublemaker. So he kind of grabbed me by the shoulder and took me down to the basement of the school so we could have a private meeting. And he looked at me, and I don't remember what he said. Well, I do remember part of it. He was Catholic. And he said, I have experienced intense kind of prejudice and hatred for being a Catholic. I have experienced that too. Like he knew. But he said, we have to go a different way with this. And I don't remember the details of what he said, but I vividly remember, because that's why I remember this incident, his eyes. He was looking into me, not at me. And I remember I was puzzled because it seemed clear that he was seeing much, much, much more in me than I saw in myself at that moment. Much more. That was powerful. That was a benefactor. And that was something more from his depth, seeing into my depth, long, long before I could possibly know that I had any depth like that, like his. I don't know how we got into all that, but I guess it's related to how these practices emerged. That in my current worldview, that was his Buddha nature. So he was present with its positive qualities. And that evokes some of mine. So I remember it vividly to this day. I was only 13. That was almost 60 years ago. It's like it happened earlier today. So that's that vivid. Okay, other questions or comments? We still have a little time. Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this. I was curious if you had any advice for continuing these practices on our own without sort of turning ourselves into an internal narrator or kind of getting distracted by trying to recall instructions as we're performing these independently.
Yeah, it is really helpful there are orally guided meditations on my website. So you'll see on the handout, I put my website there. It's really a website I hold with others. It's called sustainablecompassion.org. And it's on the first and last page of the meditation handout, sustainablecompassion, one word, .org. And there are orally guided meditations there. There are videos of me teaching and leading this stuff, like here. And there are connections to others online, ways of practicing together. And links for events and other times that I'm teaching this stuff. And my other colleague, Paul Condon, also teaches this stuff. So that's sort of that. So yeah, it is important to connect up and feel like we're held by others who are practicing similarly. But as I said, this is all adapted directly from the practice patterns that are practiced here. So the Sangha that's here and the teachers that are here, you can consider as holding you also, and holding you in this as well. Because this is really also from them, it's just coming through in a certain way. So that's a start of a response. It's true, we do need to find support with others and with teachers, and repeatedly returning to settings of teaching and learning like this. So as people invite me to teach this stuff, I do, and also Paul Condon. And there'll probably be some more of that because we have a new book coming out and that'll draw some some attention, I think.
There are two questions from online.
Sure.
Um, Can you talk about the idea of inhabiting memories like they are happening now?
Yeah.
I heard Lama Willa talk about using the power of memory to enliven the imagination, which is easier for me to understand.
Yeah, this is, it's not actually that hard. It just, it takes a little bit of getting used to, and also the recognition that we've already been doing it a lot. That is, we are often, especially when we're experiencing an emotional memory of something that happened in the past, I would say more often than not, we are not just remembering it at a purely intellectual cognitive level. Oh, how interesting. That person gave me the finger and yelled at me with all those bad names, and I became very angry. What a fascinating thing that happened. I don't think we remember it that way, by and large. What we do is we re-inhabit the memory as if it's happening now, and we relive it again and again and again. And that's the reason why we hold grudges. Grudges are because we do re-inhabit memories. We already know how to do that very, very well. Another example, which may be a little bit slightly more controversial, but it's really of the same kind, is lust. I mean, being human beings, being attracted to one or another sex, whatever previous experience we may have had with that, we don't just remember it as, oh, what an interesting experience. We actually re-inhabit the memory and relive it again and again and again, don't we? Can we be honest? Or do we have to pretend? Both with anger and with intense attachment. Don't we relive the memories, emotional memories, constantly? What about jealousy? Don't we, in a sense, when we're feeling jealous at the present time, often of the same person or people that we were jealous of last time we were all together? It's like, again, just re-inhabiting the memory of it and now living it out now again. So we all know very, very well how to re-inhabit a memory from the past. We just need to acknowledge that and then simply make a little bit of an attempt to do it with a loving moment, a caring moment, a moment that makes us happy to recall. And definitely we can. Absolutely we can. Just like we do with those other things. Let's not pretend we can't. Of course we can. We do it all the time. Okay.
Second question. Sir,
Madam.
is it similar to the practice of Tonglen, receiving suffering and sending healing energy while trying to dismantle our deeply held self-centered attitude?
Yeah, it's just that here in this kind of mode of practice, within this kind of system of practice, I'm trying to draw upon some of the flavor of the less effortful dimensions of practice that come through the Nyingma and Kagyu traditions. So that even when we're doing what are called relative practices, like extending love and compassion and tonglen and things like that, can we learn to explore the possibility of doing them in a way that's a little less intensely effortful? Because it's very hard, I found in my own experience over the years, to dismantle the grasping to the self when my mind is grasping so hard to trying to do the practice so well, the sense of self trying to do the practice so well, including dismantling the sense of self that's trying so desperately to do the practice. It starts to be a bit of a paradox. So when I trained in a more effortfully, I mean, all the practice traditions of Tibet involve quite a bit of effortful practice in relative practices. And the effortless aspect of practice is more ultimate practice, just resting in or nature mind, or letting the nature mind itself do the practice. And we're not able to do that ultimate kind of practice, most of us, without a lot of help from relative practices that operate within our familiar conceptual frameworks or start to transform them. And it does take effort. And this we just did takes effort. But there could be more or less flavor of effortlessness, even in the relative practice that involves some effort, like letting this healing environment hold all parts of yourself, letting this loving healing environment that your field of care is helping you become, that's a loving healing environment that's like a quality of the nature of your mind. Letting it take care of things, letting it hold every part of you, letting it heal those parts of you by letting them deeply be, to find their own place in their own time. Welcome to be here, spaciously allowing them. Then letting others be included, letting that help you with maybe a little less effort. Commune with them, sense them, resonate with them in their deep kind of primordial goodness, dignity, capacity, their depth. They're more than my superficial labels and images. Oh, that's a girl, that's a boy, that's this one I kind of like, that one I don't kind of like. She said something nice to me, he didn't say anything nice to me. Below all that, sensing more in the depth of being, letting this healing environment help us to sense more from our depth in their depth. So there's still effort involved, but a little less intense effortfulness of a narrow grasping in the mind to a sense of self, struggling to get it right. Not that. Letting this healing environment that the field of care helps us, that is evoked really from our deep nature by the field of care that's embodying that nature, let that healing environment do much of the work and just help us, so the effort becomes more supported by what's beyond effort. So that's a little bit of the spirit of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, kind of just running through the relative practice. So that's what I try to do with it. And yes, it is very much in the spirit of Tonglen. And part of my motivation for even getting into all this stuff was many decades ago, I was seeing in the early stages of Tibetan Buddhism coming into the West, there was a tendency that people were latching on to Tonglen as the main way coming from Tibet to begin to cultivate love and compassion. But historically, I think Tonglen was actually a pretty advanced practice. It was practiced by Kadampa masters and monks and nuns whose lives were dedicated to cultivating bodhicitta. And at some stage of their practice, Tonglen just made, I think, deep internal sense to them and naturally unfolded. But for those just beginning to introduce the possibility of cultivating love and compassion with Tonglen, now breathe in all the sufferings of all the realms of all beings and the intensities of the hells and the pretas and all that deep into your heart, and then breathe out all your well-being and resources, right? I think for beginners, it gives a lot of us lung. It did me. So, meaning intense energy problems in our body. So that became actually one part of the motivation to develop a way of introducing love, compassion, and wisdom that started more fundamentally drawing from certain more fundamental areas of Tibetan Buddhism, and then introduced Tonglen after all this had been developed. So in the new book, Tonglen is introduced, but now in a way that's flowing right out of these practices. So the person asking that question was, I think, discerning. Yeah, that's right. This is moving toward Tonglen, and it already is the very spirit of Tonglen, kind of embedded in what we're doing. That's right. And there's something there.
Oh, thank you for the practice. My question is, when we include everyone in the field of care, I started to feel, and I want to avoid it, of course, but I've started to feel like I am kind of superior and all those suffering beings are ignorant. And my ego started to be like, oh, I am here to save you all. So it feels very uncomfortable to feel that, but it kind of pops up in my head.
Yeah. That's a very, very natural, I mean, kind of familiar pattern, I think, for many of us. So that's an obstruction to experiencing more of our deep nature, our Buddha nature. It pretends to be a kind of a deep kind of like, I'm a deep person, unlike these others, and I have deep kind of knowledge. So it pretends to be our Buddha nature, but it's not. It's a kind of a tendency toward actually avoiding more of our Buddha nature by appropriating what we think it is or what it represents for our self-grasping patterns of mind. So that's a very familiar kind of habit, I think, to many of us, most of us, at a certain stage of practice. It's almost unavoidable. So then you let that, noticing that you said, well, that was really uncomfortable. I would go further and say it's not just uncomfortable, it's a further obstruction to your Buddha nature. It's an obstruction to further development. So knowing that it is, we can, what do? We're having access these loving qualities, noticing, you noticed it. It's just the third step you didn't do. Let it be included in this loving, healing environment. Now you're not fully identified with it anymore. So now it can begin to find its own place in its own time, can begin to heal. Maybe this pattern of mind has been trying to protect me and defend me and make me somebody important so others will care about me. Maybe this pattern of mind has been working very, very hard for me in a way that's not understanding very well. Maybe this pattern of mind deeply needs healing and warmth and love so it can relax and know that the help that it's been trying to give is here. That help is here from the depth of my being. And that pattern of that self-grasping pattern of mind can feel that help is here because it's being held in that power of healing and warmth and help. And then it'll begin to relax and settle, because we're not feeding it now. The mind's not identified with it anymore. We're becoming the healing environment that's holding it. So we're not it. Okay. Thank you. Great questions. Thank you. So we have 5 minutes. Anything more?
Question is now, what do you mean exactly when you say luminosity? And the second question, how many terms or how many meanings in the Tibetan Buddhism of this luminosity is? Thank you.
Yeah. I think for the purpose of this practice context, I'm happy to go with the word lucidity or clarity or cognizance. It doesn't have to be luminosity. Luminosity is gesturing toward the luminous, radiant nature of all phenomena as they are experienced from the nature of mind itself. So it's a way of experiencing how things are as radiant expressions of the nature of mind. And that comes with deepening practice into the nature of mind itself. It's mainly like that.
So luminous is a synonym of clarity. Yeah, it's right.
Not quite.
Not quite.
Yeah, I may have been reaching too far by using that word, but the reason I use it is just because it may be evocative for someone. It's a word. Clarity is selwa in Tibetan. Luminosity is usel. And usel is kind of a term of depth, of a kind of a deep recognition of the nature of things as luminous expressions of primordial awareness. So I don't actually want to get into it that much more because it is not graspable through our ordinary patterns of mind. I understand your motivation, but I think what I said is about the best I can say it. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's all introduced to me by my own teachers, of course. Great. So almost at the very end, any brief, quick comment or question before we finish for tonight? Okay, in the back. Yannicka, is it? Yeah. Need a mic. Okay.
It's out of curiosity. I'm just wondering if there is any equivalent in the Buddhist teachings that would describe parts of self.
Oh yeah, I mean, really it's all the different states of mind and reactions that are organized around a sense of self that's reified, so that the mind is not conscious that that sense of self has been constructed by the mind itself. It just seems to be a thing. So I'm just referring to all those states of mind and kinds of mental reactions of all kinds, much of which is laid out in Abhidharmas, that are organized around reified sense of self, and correlated with that, a reified construct of the world around that self. So that's what I mean by parts of our mind.
And would you say that's the same what, like in the therapeutic context, when they talk about parts of self, I have the idea that they're actually talking about like the little child in me, or like these other like kind of characters that they're talking
I think
about.
that's coming from internal family systems, and I think that can be very helpful, because I think many of them are like little children, and that if we treated them more like a parent does with a troubled child, we'd do a lot better with them than by trying to suppress, deny, avoid, or simply identify with and act out, which are the two predominant options in modern societies: to suppress, deny, avoid as best we can, or to just act out whatever reactive state of mind is currently predominant, let it suck our mind into identification with it, and act it out. Those are the only two options that most people know about. I think Buddhism introduces a third option, which is how to be with, and particularly in the tradition that I'm sharing from, how to be with in a way that is profoundly warm, allowing them to reveal their nature, these states of mind, in their own time, in their own way, to metabolize themselves, to release themselves, to liberate themselves, to become freed. That's a profound third way to be with feelings. That's what I'm trying to introduce here. That's coming from Tibetan Buddhism and from my teachers. Okay, I think end of time. Thank you all.